I remember it was October, it was cold. There were a lot of things that were supposed to happen that night that didn't. We took the car that we had and modified it, turned it into a roller coaster. And I looked over at my friend and I'm like, hey, how fast are we going? And you know, he's got his hand on the steering wheel and he kind of like just looks at it. He's like, 125. The words came out of his mouth like it was nothing.
A 19-year-old kid in 1993 had turned his back on God. On this road, on an October night, God got his attention. Real people. Their stories. This is My U-Turn. Brimfield, Illinois. A rural farming community and home to an unusual type of road, the Brimfield Jubilee Road. In fact, some of the locals have called this road Coaster Road. On a beautiful fall day, I met up with Chad at the place of the accident, which occurred 20 years ago, to find out what led up to that day and what really happened on that tragic night. So Chad, tell me, you're 9 years old, and would you say that's when you met Jesus?
We went to church, of course, and I got saved, filled with the Holy Spirit, and called to the ministry all in the same night, even though I had no idea what a youth pastor was at that time. And then a course of events through my junior high school years, I felt like God disappointed me and let me down. So
do you feel comfortable going into that at all?
I can, sure, a little bit.
How did you feel like God let you down, like in junior high?
Okay. In junior high, well, I was little. I was like the smallest kid in class, and I always wanted to play football. And so I showed up to try out for football. I was going to be a quarterback. So and the coach was like, "You're too small." And I'm like, I want to play. I can throw it. Watch. And I threw a couple for him, and he liked it. So I had to go get my physical because that's just one of the procedures you have to do to play sports. As soon as I took off my shirt, the doctor was like, "You can't play," because when I was 6, I had open heart surgery, and they're like, "Son, you can't play." And I'm like, "Why?" And like, because if you get hit in the chest, you could die. And I'm like, "Well, some things are worth dying for," you know. I'm like, "Let's do this." And he's like, "I'm sorry, son, you just can't do it." And you know, I was taught, you know, that God is in charge of everything.
Right.
And so in my 8th grade mind, it was, God did this to me. And so why did he do this to me? Why couldn't I have been normal to be able to fulfill that dream?
Do you have like another example of like maybe in high school
where
you felt like God let you down?
I turned 18, and I wanted always to be a Marine, and so on my 18th birthday I went to enlist, and there again the same reason why I couldn't be a Marine, because of the open heart surgery, and I was so tired of hearing that as an excuse of why I couldn't do something. And there again, God's in control of everything, and I was really disappointed and hurt, and like, this just totally, you know, it sucked. And I don't know, I was just like mad, and I'm like, you know what, God, I don't, if this is the life you gave me, I don't need your help. I can screw it up on my own if this is how it's gonna go.
Hey, okay, God gave you this physical limitation with your open heart surgery, all that, but there's all these other, you know, outlets for you to flourish and, you know, do great things for God? Or were you just so mindset on these physical things like football and being a Marine?
Well, yeah, I mean, I had people tell me that stuff, that that even though you are the way you are, God made you special, and He has a plan and a purpose. But it's like there was so much tunnel vision to those areas it was hard to look at areas where God was working because those areas where He wasn't were so big to me. My parents got divorced when I was 6. My dad told me, my biological father, dad told me that he didn't want me in his life at the age 7, and that he didn't have time for me. It formed this like pain inside me, for lack of better words. So I started self-medicating. Started smoking pot. Started smoking cigarettes. Started drinking, and then I fought a lot. And I didn't really fight to win.
You're just angry.
I was just angry. Yeah, I was just like looking for anything to fill this like pain, to take it away, to keep my mind off of it. So, which led me to a couple of friends of mine that would one friend would give us pot. And all we had to do was buy chips, a soda, and a movie, and we could smoke all we want.
Pretty good deal for you, not him.
Yeah, so like every Thursday, Friday, Saturday night, that's what we did. We went bowling at Mount Holly for rock and roll, and then after that went out and got lit up, and sometimes showed up bowling lit up. And so during that, we you develop friendships, and so which led us to where we're at.
And tell me if you felt this way. It's like from where you were, when you're 9 or 10, to where you're now at 18, 19. It's almost like a different person.
Absolutely.
Trying to figure out, why have I been dealt this card, and how do I process all this pain, and
Right.
This is the best way I've felt to deal with it.
Well, that reminds me of a conversation I had with my mom. Now, my mom and dad and stepdad, we were going to church this whole time. Active in the youth ministry off and on. My brother was super active in the youth group, and which only drove me nuts, because he was like the good kid, and I could never measure up. But he was like my younger brother, so it wasn't like, why can't you be like your older brother? The reversal. So that just irritated me even more. And the conversation I had with my mom one day was, my mom looked at me with tears in her eyes, and she's like, "What happened to my little boy?" And I just looked at her in the most hateful, degrading, mean tone. I said, "He died." And she just lost it, and I walked out, and it was just a moment where that I didn't feel like there was any hope, so why even try?
Did you regret it, saying that to her right away?
Absolutely not.
Or you meant it at the time?
Absolutely. I know it sounds horrible to say now, and I have since then apologized, but it was one of those moments where everything was kind of coming to a head, and the higher I got, the crazy thing about getting drunk and getting high is I would come home and I would put on my headphones so I could sleep, and I could still hear God talking to me. No matter how high I got, no matter how loud the music got, no matter how drunk I got, I could still hear God saying, "What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing?"
So had this happened all the way through? God's voice is still
Yeah.
still there, present for you?
Yeah. I remember on the night of the wreck, about an hour before the wreck, we were at Taco Bell. Me and my buddy were on our way out of the restaurant to go for a ride, and God's like, "Hey, I need you to say something to him." Now, me and him we both went to church. We didn't go to the same church, we went to different churches, and we would make fun of each other when we were getting high and drinking about church and God. And so at that point, I was like, "You know what, God, screw you, I'm done. You're gonna mess with my friend, and no, I want nothing to do with you." So we got into his car and came out here just to go for a ride, and he had an RX-7 twin turbo. It was a lot faster than my Chevette. We were planning on coming out here, the three of us, and my buddy's RX-7, And that's where things started kind of turning. Um, there were a lot of things that were supposed to happen that night that didn't. My friend that would give us pot couldn't make it because he had to work. So that means that I was no longer sitting in the back seat of the car. I was now riding shotgun. We were supposed to get high that night. We were supposed to get drunk that night. Those two things didn't happen. All we had was soda and cigarettes. Things, people like, it was circumstance or it was luck but I honestly felt like now that God was protecting me. So we came out here and we made one run out and one run back, and then we were going to go out one more time and come back in and then go back into town. So,
and that's all because of just the way this road is
the road is built to, I'm sure the highway department did not design it and be like, hey, you know what, this is going to be awesome. But we took the car that we had and modified it and turned it into a roller coaster. And the faster you go, the funner it was. And, music's blaring, and we were coming back in for our last trip.
Had you gotten there before?
We did the week before in my friend's LeSabre, but just the front end of the car. So it was like a wheel hop. But we were like, dude, that was awesome. And that's when we got the idea. I'm like, hey, let's take my other friend's car, because it was an RX-7. So we're like, dude, yeah, next weekend we're doing this. So so that's where we got the idea from. And so we were coming back in town, and I remember it was October, it was cold. So we were coming up the hill, and I flicked my cigarette out, and I rolled the window up, and I looked over at my friend, and I'm like, hey, how fast are we going? And he's got his hand on the steering wheel, and he kind of like just looks at it. He's like, 125. And the words came out of his mouth like it was nothing. And I said, don't you need to slow down? He's like, no, man, I got it. And as soon as he said that, the car hit the top of the hill, and all we saw was sky. And the engine redlined. We were in the air. And we went up, and the hill kind of goes up and down and levels out, and then it drops back down. And we hit the part where it came back down at. So the front of the car buckles up. We slide into the other lane going down the hill. We hit the bottom of the hill, and we slide back over. And we get to the top of the hill, and I'm thinking, you know what? The car's wrecked, yeah, but we're okay. We made it. I thought that it was over. I thought we'd just slide to a stop, and, we'd have to walk to someone's house and explain to our parents why we wrecked the car. But the car proceeded to start fishtailing once we got to the top of the hill. Fishtailed 3 or 4 times and spun around backwards, and we went into the ditch. And that just sent the car tumbling. And so I'm inside this car, and I grabbed the oh crap handle in the bottom of my seat. And as soon as we started flipping, it jerked me free because we were going with so much force, just no hanging on. And so we're tossing in this car, and we're tumbling, and we went across the street, and we went through a tree stump that was like 4 foot tall, like this big around. We shattered it, they said. And then we flipped, we kept going, and we hit a tree branch 10 feet in the air, and we kept flipping, and there was a fence post, fence rail, and kept tumbling, went through another wooden fence, went through a cow field, and went over a barbed wire fence and landed wheels down. Now the whole time I'm in this car, I'm flipping, and it's crazy loud. The whole time I'm like, don't you dare die. If you die, I'm gonna kick your butt. Don't you dare die, because if you die, you know exactly where you're going. And so
you're saying that to yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I was saying it to myself. And the car stopped, wheels down, which I thought was pretty amazing. The first thing I did before I even opened my eyes was wiggle my fingers and my toes. I'm like, cool, I'm not paralyzed, I'm good. So I opened my eyes and tried to open my door, and I couldn't because it was stuck next to a fence post. So I undid my seatbelt, and I'm like, hey man, we need to get out of the car. And I looked over, and they weren't there. And I was just like, great. So I climbed out of the car. Of course, my adrenaline's just going at that stage. And
Is their door? Is that door ripped off?
The door wasn't there. I mean, at that stage, I didn't know if it was gone or not.
Right.
It was dark. It was pitch black out here. And I climbed out of the car and walked around and climbed through the barbed wire fence. And I was screaming his name, just screaming. And we happened to go through somebody's front yard. So all these people come running outside with flashlights. I mean, it was like, all you saw was these lights bouncing, and they're screaming like, where are you, where are you? And I'm like, I'm over here. And they found me, and they asked me like, how many of there were you? And I'm like, well, there was 2 of us, and he's not in the car. So they left me alone. I climbed through the fence, and I made it like this far, and I went to one knee because the pain started showing up, and then I was down at 2, and then I eventually just laid down because the pain was just unreal. And I'm laying there in the middle of this field, staring up at the sky, cold, wearing my flannel because it was, the grunge years, and I'm laying there, and all of a sudden I hear this voice. It's like, hey Chad, what else is it gonna take for you to follow me? And I just kind of laid there, and I'm like, you know what? Deal. I'm in. Whatever you want me to do, wherever you want me to go, I'll say whatever you want me to say. I was like, you take away the drugs and the alcohol, the fighting, the girls, all that away, and I'm in. And I quit smoking that night. I quit drinking that night. I quit smoking pot that night. Cold turkey, straight up. And then one of the guys came back to me, and they're checking on me, making sure I'm okay. I never lost consciousness. I was awake through the whole thing, and the paramedics showed up and took me to the hospital. So I was in the ER, and I'm laying there. And the amazing thing to the story, well, one of the many amazing things, was I'm laying there, and then all of a sudden this head pops over me, and it was my youth pastor. The backstory on that was, 2 months before the wreck, me and him had gotten into a fist fight at church. And, at church, in front of, in the parking lot.
Fight church.
Yeah, and people were pulling us apart, and I was telling him where to go and how to get there, and and all that stuff. But he was the first person to the hospital. He beat my parents there, and he's like, "What's up, Speed Racer?" And I'm like, "Dude, my Speed Racer days are done." So they finally call my parents, and my parents show up, and my mom walks in the room, and she's just like, she was just devastated to see what the condition I was in. And I mean, I'm like, "Hey Mom, how you doing?" I'm like, "I'm okay, I'm fine." And she's like, "Whatever." And the police came in, of course, and started questioning me about the wreck, and I refused to tell them anything until they told me what was going on with my buddy, and they told me, and he didn't make it. So that changed the course of everything for me. More than, I would say, even more than me and God making everything cool. Because the youth pastor came totally back, and I'm like, okay, because of the kids that me and him were, even though we went to church, we didn't get it. We didn't, for some reason, something didn't click for us to understand that God really, really loves us, and he doesn't care where we've been, what we do, or what we said, that he still loves us regardless. And I made my mind up in that emergency room that's the youth pastor that I'm going to become.
If I can jump back a little bit.
Okay.
You mentioned when you found out that your buddy didn't make it,
Mm-hmm.
that the tremendous impact that had on you, perhaps even more so than, God saying to you, is this what it takes? Have you ever had either the thought or the conversation with God of, that is what it took for me. That's just where I was. How have you reconciled that?
Well, I have gone through the question of like, why did I make it and why he didn't, and the answer I have for that is I don't know. And
Because your whole side of the car.
my whole side of the car is fine. My door is got a scratch on it. My window is still there, and above my head is fine. It literally is like if someone had their hand around the car and just like wham, wham, and just beat the crap out of the rest of the car. So I mean,
Because the cops were amazed that
Yeah.
you could walk away from that, right?
yeah, the cops were like, "You didn't walk away from that." And I'm like, "Yeah, I did." And they literally argued with me. And I'm like, "Yes, I did." And there was like, "There's no way people don't walk away from that car." And then I just told them my story. I mean, they interviewed me, I think, 4 or 5 times. I'm trying to make sure I was keeping my story straight, and I totally understand that. But as far as like asking God why did it go down the way it went, I think that, you know, in the condition that I was in, that it would have taken something like that. He set me up for that. For he knew what was going to go down. He knew how I was going to turn out. And I don't want to say that. See, some people are going to view that as like a punishment, as like God needed to knock me around to get my attention. I don't look at it as a punishment. Several examples in the Bible of people going through a hellish ordeal to get them to find out what Jesus and what real love is, and what God's purpose is for their lives. I mean, you have everything from Daniel in the lion's den, someone that was totally serving God and ended up in a place of death and survived the night and went on to become an incredible man. I'm sure at that moment where he was getting tossed in there, he's like, okay, if this is it, this is it. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, I mean, get thrown in the furnace. I mean, they're like, okay, whatever it is, this is it.
And then 2 weeks after the wreck here, something else tragic happened. And you want to mention what happened?
Yeah, it was like 2-3 weeks after the wreck. My little brother passed away. He had a stroke at 17, and he finished his race. You know, people were like, you know, he was so young, and you know, he had his whole life ahead of him, and I'm like, some people's races are longer than others.
You already had that sort of clarity after the accident?
Well, not initially. When everything was going down, and I was like, I kind of had a relapse. I was like, what are you doing, God? What are you doing? This kid loves you, and he's done nothing but live for you. And this is how he goes out? Really? And I was throwing things, and God's like, I need you to think about something. And I'm like, what? He's like, where's he going? And I'm like, he's going to the hospital. Aren't you paying attention? You know, and he's like, no, where's he going? And I'm like, okay, I got it. He's going home. And so that, you know, has been a motivator as well. That is a perfect example of someone living their life exactly the way God intended it. Not that he was perfect, but he went all out for God. And if that's how I have to live my life, to go all out, you know, it wasn't about being a football player. It wasn't about being a Marine to prove something to myself. We need to step back and kind of just like, okay, what's the overall bigger picture? Okay, so what if Chad's not a football player? You know, in those moments when you're in tunnel vision, you know, whether, you know, you're a 19-year-old kid that's totally ticked off at God, or, you know, you're a 7-year-old kid that their parents are going through divorce, or, you know, you're a 65-year-old guy that's got cancer. all these tragedies that happen in life, my answer to them is, it's not why do bad things happen to good people. What do good people do when bad things happen? And there's a story in the Bible that talks about Jonathan and his armor bearer. It's the story kind of goes, Saul and his boys were, hanging out, and Jonathan and his armor bearer go off by themselves. And he's like, we're going to take these dudes out. And the armor bearer is like, dude, it's only me and you, and I don't even have a sword. And he's like, well, if we do this, perhaps God will be with us. And it's in those perhaps, in that maybe, where God takes us and steps back and watches us do what he's taught us to do. And not that he leaves us, but it's literally like showing your kid how to ride a bike. Like, you run beside him, you're holding them up the whole time. But once we feel like they got their balance, we let them go. And even though they ride 2-3 feet and crash and turn around and scream at us because we let them go, it's the same concept with God. It's like he wants us to be able to not to go off on our own, but to take the things that he's taught us and do it. And that's kind of how I've wrapped this whole thing in my life. That it's a very painful and a very dark time. I'm not fully over it. I don't know if I ever will be. But I do know this is that it was when I made my U-turn. I mean, literally. I was in a car doing 125 miles an hour. And not to make that sound heroic or to glorify that, by no means. Everybody has their own moment. Everybody has the moment with God where everything kind of stops and you just make that decision. And hopefully this helps someone.
Is that your approach with the kids that you have in youth groups and in your own ministry? Of, do you tell them this story?
I don't go into it every time I talk to somebody, but I have made it a point that everyone I run into, that they will never walk away from me not knowing where I stand and what I'm about, and what God's about. Not that I give them the whole gambit of every answer to every question, but I definitely want to pour into them that God loves them, that Jesus died on the cross for them, and that it's not just about fire insurance, it's a relationship. It's an ongoing, ever increasing thing, that there is no arrival. You never I'm there, there's always going to be struggles, there's always going to be pain. And it's just a matter of, okay, what do we do? Do we get bitter or do we get better? Just kind of focus on what's God about. And every scenario is different. So there's not a blanket answer, which is what I love about God, that there's not a blanket answer that we try to develop.
Can't put them in a box.
Right.
That's well said.